happy to answer them. And we have plenty of time, so.
Anyone else?
And you don't have, if you didn't fill out a card yet, you can fill one out right now with anything that comes up as I'm talking to. And I'm going to give our speakers an opportunity to supplement any answers and have comments as well. So if you wouldn't mind sharing the microphone. Absolutely. First, we have from Gabrielle Milch. Gabrielle, would you mind just waving your hand? Thanks for coming. Septic tank conversions and advanced wastewater treatment. So I guess the question is, reuse and advanced technology is expensive. Can federal, state, and local offices work together? How can we address cost to homeowners? And will endure with utilities? What was that last word?
How the utility, yeah.
Okay, so let's go over it. So let me give start with a little bit of history on the subject, because some folks may have not been following it long enough. I mentioned it briefly before, but we can go into a little more detail now. In 2011, I want to say, no, 2010, we passed a comprehensive reform for septic tanks. That was led by, in a bipartisan effort by State Senator Lee Constantine in the Senate and several folks in the House. And it was even controversial then, not because it wasn't going to help the environment, but concerns over costs. So I had on the floor, when it looked like we were going to lose some of the Democrats, and there's only a certain number of us, I got on the floor and vigorously defended it, knowing that there would be money there to help upgrade these systems. And it's not just important for red tide, it's important for the springs, which was really the main catalyst for it back then, with places like Wakaiba, where you have all these septic tanks around the spring there. And it passed, with a lot of Republicans and some Democrats voting against it. It passed narrowly, got into law, and then in the veto override session, when Governor Scott got into office, it was repealed promptly in January of next year. But it was desperately needed, and now we're seeing some of the effects of it. Yes, agriculture is part of the red tide, without question. Yes, fertilizer runoff from people's properties and golf courses and industry is part of it, and as is wastewater. But another part of it that has been tough because it affects individual residents, both for our springs and around the Caloosahatchee, St. Lucie areas, and in the Indian River Lagoon area, is septic tanks. And after about 10 years, you're supposed to have to inspect it every 10 years, and they tend to not last longer than that. However, most people, because it's expensive, tend to just have a septic tank and never look unless there's a problem. And it can go 10, 20, 30 years before they finally realize there was a breach and it was leaking out, and obviously those are heavy nutrients going into our water bodies. So my understanding is, with some comments from certain legislative leaders and our new governor, that this is going to be something they're going to relook at in the state legislature. But we need to help them on the federal level. For anyone who had a septic tank before now, and I'm not sure what date they're going to pick, they should be eligible for funds to convert it to septic and to help out local governments to convert neighborhoods to septic. It doesn't mean that the total cost goes to all the taxpayers, but we really need to solve this. And if we don't use the weight of the state government and the federal government to help solve it through infrastructure improvements and grants, it's just not going to happen. And a lot of folks who have septic tanks in a lot of the rural areas, many of them are seniors on fixed budgets. And so we want them fixed, but we know many folks don't have the means to do it. Going forward, though, we absolutely have to update our building and community codes to make sure that we're minimizing the use of septic tanks, particularly if they're anywhere near a stream, anywhere near a major river, around the Everglades area. Those are areas that that absolutely, it hurts quite a bit. And I'm hopeful that through the $1 trillion infrastructure package that we look to put forward this year, that part of it will go to upgrading from septic tanks to sewers. And I'll be pushing for that. And on the federal level, we basically provide, our biggest role is to provide the resources, and then our state and local governments have to put together the requirements for upgrading infrastructure, as well as the individual grant programs for upgrading people's individual properties. It's a priority of mine. I mentioned it in my opening, so you know I'm not just answering your question. This is already part of our vision, and it's one of the things that we have to fix. So thank you for that, Gabrielle. And I'm going to go to our panel as well to address any comments that you may have.
Great, thank you, Gabby. It's nice to see you again. I just spoke about this issue at the League of Conservation, or the League of Women Voters in Seminole County. And right before the town hall today, I went to the Seminole Water Conservation Districts. They don't pay. So my professional life, I'm a real estate agent, and right before here, they had the statewide state summit, if you will, prior to the legislative session starting. It's where we get all of our ducks in a row. We're the second largest lobbying group. Why I say that is because many times I have brought up the importance of fracking, of septic tanks, of different things, to be one of our key 4 points that we bring up that are our talking points. And there's more than 1,000 that go. And this year is the first year that I've seen in the 7 years that the talking point number 1 is water quality. And I think it's too bad that it has to get so bad where now you're starting to see where you have where people are not buying homes in certain areas, or if they are under the threat that they can't fish, or that they're not going to be able to sell their home for the price that they bought it. You look at Sanibel Island, for example. Those type of things because they realize, just as Congressman Soto said, that it's not one specific issue. It's not the septic tanks. It's not agriculture. It's a combination, and we're all responsible every time that we take a shower or any time that we put fertilizer on our grass. So I think that there is septic tank money there. I am going to get you a detailed report from what we were talking about. It was going into the weekend, so I didn't get the return calls. But there is money there depending if you're in the proximity of the most critical zones. And we talked about that there are certain kind of rings that you would put on it would be the highest impact of septic tank failure or just really bad septic tank maintenance. And so I look forward that this is included and the pressures being put on our state representatives and senators, both from the septic issue but also the water quality issues.
Ms. Moncrief, is there anything like that?
I just want to add, because it all kind of, a lot of times it comes down to money, and we're talking about trying to reinvest and whether it's converting from septic to sewer, whether it's helping communities who have old sewer lines that are also leaking in many places in Florida. At the state level, this year, there's talk of a surplus. We're going to see over $800 million of extra state money. And over the last 10 years, what the legislature at the state level has unfortunately done is they've said, oh, there's surplus money. Let's do a whole suite of tax breaks for various special interests usually. The problem with that is that you don't really have a surplus if you're not already meeting your basic needs. And it's hard to say that Florida is meeting our basic needs when it comes to helping communities, especially rural communities that don't have a tax base to raise the funds to help their citizens go from septic to sewer, just as an example. And so I think that's part of what needs to change at the state level is that we as citizens need to be reminding our state lawmakers that we don't get to call that money a surplus until we're meeting our basic needs. Then we can call it a surplus. Instead, what we should be looking at that money as is an opportunity to reinvest in our state and to meet our basic needs. Much like the infrastructure, it's wonderful that at the federal level we have folks like Representative Soto saying we need to reinvest, we need to invest. our state lawmakers need to hear that message, both from the top and also from the bottom from us.
Thank you for that. And I did want to, there, on the local level, all of you can go in front of your county and city commissioners when new developments are coming up in areas around Spring Sheds and in areas around the Kissimmee Chain of Lakes, in Seminole, Orange, and Osceola County, and speak up and say we shouldn't have new developments that are relying on septic tanks. And that is one of the direct ways in the Tri-County area that you can help, is simply by just speaking up. And in Polk County, Lake Hall is part of the Kissimmee Chain of Lakes, and so there's an opportunity for all counties in the district for folks to be able to stand up, but you've got to be paying attention and meeting with your county commissioners and city commissioners. Next, we have Chuck O'Neill from Speak Up Wekiva, speaking in the Springs. Thanks for being here. What can be done to protect public lands from the Trump administration's appointments and policies? So there's a couple things, and Ms. Moncrief started off with one of the big ones, the land conservation, land, water, legacy, land, water, legacy.
Land Water Conservation Fund.
Gosh, I'm terrible at
The
that.
federal one?
Yes,
Yeah.
Land Water Conservation Fund, thank you. But I know what it means to this district. It means Moss Park, it means the Kissimmee Lakefront, funding that was drawn down for 2 parks in the district. How many people have been to the Kissimmee Lakefront? Raise your hand if you have. Okay, yeah, I'm very popular. How many have been to Moss Park? Okay, a lot of people have been there too. What about Split Oak? All right, I see this crowd's good. Obviously, just recently I fought to try to make sure Split Oak wasn't totally split, and that's something I know Mr. O'Neill is working on quite a bit. So first, on appointments, that's the Senate. I write letters of support, but I don't get to vote on appointments. But on the policies, Natural Resources is the committee that will deal with all the public lands issues. And while we were able to pass the Land Water Conservation Fund out of our committee, it never got through the House, and it never got to the Senate. So this year, I know we're ready to queue it up for the first 2 or 3 months, pass it out of the Natural Resources Committee and out of the House. And then it'll be like with the Water Resource Development Act, it'll be about pushing the Senate to get these 2 things over the top. Because I expect us to send those out pretty quickly. And both those will go out of my committee, so I'm going to be really honored to be able to vote for it. But what that means locally is places like Kissimmee Lakefront, which received a grant, and places like Moss Park in Orange County that received a grant, so that we can enjoy our local parks. In addition, we have a huge battle over the shrinking of national monuments, whether it is Grand Staircase, whether it's Bears Ears, those were 2 national monuments that were narrowed down, and will certainly be not only having oversight hearings on that, but potentially lawsuits. Because the one issue with oversight is we can expose the problem, but if we don't have a willing partner in the Senate to pass a law, or we get a veto, then you can't stop it. And again, with the appropriations, we could defund certain things like no dollars shall be used to go against the shrinking of national monuments. But if we don't have a willing partner in the Senate on that, then all we can do is make a huge scene. So one of the other things we'll be looking at is lawsuits where needed. And then there's public sentiment. We've seen, even when we were in the minority in all chambers, something like putting immigrant kids in cages got so much outcry that they had to stop doing it. So I still think public sentiment, or we saw just yesterday, when people's planes started getting messed with, when people finally started empathizing with 800,000 federal workers who missed 2 paychecks now, when people realized that their tax refunds were going to be delayed, SNAP benefits were going to be delayed, suddenly, all at once, it became too much pressure to bear. So oversight can help that, but public sentiment is so much about it. You'll hear Speaker Pelosi talk about it. Lincoln says public sentiment is everything. With it, you can accomplish anything. Without it, you can't do anything. So oversight will help with public sentiment to help put pressure on the Senate, but some of it will be lawsuits, including what we call quo warranto actions, which is when an elected or appointed official violates law, you could go to court to force them to comply with the law. So you'll see that sometimes, sparingly, but when needed. But I know there's lawsuits going on right now with these national monuments, and that'll be a big part of it. Our incoming chairman, Raul Grijalva, is a huge proponent of our national monuments. He's from New Mexico, in the area around Bears Ears, in Utah, and has a lot of tribes in the district. We'll have, for the first time, Native Americans who were elected to Congress serving on that committee, who will be able to really talk about those tribal voices. So those will be some of the issues. With regard to other public lands, which is really more public waters, like stopping oil drilling, there is a near uniform consensus, because we don't know where Senator Scott is, but we know where the whole House delegation is and where Senator Rubio is, of at least pushing the ban down another 10 years. Obviously, I want it to be a permanent ban on oil drilling near and around the shores of Florida, but there's already a push to at least increase the ban another 10 years. That has near consensus. So we'll see. Hopefully it'll be 100% consensus. There's a few members who haven't talked about it yet. So those are some of the plans we have to deal with. It is pass these two critical pieces of legislation, use our oversight powers, and even lawsuits sparingly to hold administration officials accountable, and here in Florida in particular, drawing down those funds for these parks that we love and protecting Florida from offshore oil drilling. Thank you for that great question. I want to kick it over to our panel for additional thoughts that you all may have.
I'll keep it brief. I mean, I think your question was, how do we protect our public lands, our conservation lands from the unfortunately bad decisions that the Trump administration is making? And I think on the state level, one of the best things that we can do is lead. That Florida can lead on these things. Our amendment in 2014 that passed is nearly as big as the National Land and Water Conservation Fund allocation. You know, the Land and Water Conservation Fund on the federal level comes from fees on oil and gas drilling. It can be up to $900 billion that the U.S. Congress and Senate can allocate. The Water and Land Conservation Amendment here in Florida this year is going to be about $825 million. So I think one of the best ways that we can, as a state, protect our conservation lands is, we don't need to wait for the Trump administration. We actually have some great capacity and tools to protect it ourselves.
I agree with what Aliki just said, that also what we're seeing, especially in Orange County, that we're seeing that there are property owners willing to sell, and that Orange County is willing to buy at the right price these lands. But right now, what I don't see happening is the educational level of how does a county go about that. And I think, Aliki, maybe you can help me on this, that also that a big sticking point, at least the excuse that was given, that why the state doesn't want to acquire more lands is because they don't want to be responsible for that management after the fact. So I think it's important that we work together with state officials to say, we want this land set aside, but not only do we want the land set aside, we the people of Orange County, or we the people of Osceola County, or Polk County, that we will manage it. You help us preserve it, you help us purchase this from a willing owner. And so we can keep this land preserved. The Herod property is the one that I'm speaking of specifically. Come up with that price. And I think that it would be great if the department that's overseeing that, the allocation of that money and the implementation of it, really does a better job reaching out to the counties and municipalities and say, here, 101, this is how we do it, if you have the interest, and go from there.
Thank you, Mr. Rollins. Next, we have Sharon McBreen. Want to raise your hand? Thanks for being here. First, a thank you for votes on fisheries and MSA. My pleasure.
Can you read that? Because I didn't realize you were going to read these out.
That's okay. I'm gonna form it in a phrase that'll make sense here.
Okay.
Yeah, don't worry, I got everybody covered here. We're gonna make everybody look good here. And the question is, what can be done to save Split Oak from getting an expressway built through it? So this is obviously a very huge issue. I was the first elected official, not sure how many have done it since then, but to express concerns about Split Oak being divided right through with the new Osceola Parkway extension. While they've made a now more southerly route, it's still taking away a lot of the land from Split Oak that was put in place all for conservation, not to be split by Osceola Parkway. And so that letter still stands. I think it should be out of it altogether. But the fact of the matter is, I cannot force them to do that. I need your help. And I know there's a lawsuit that's still going on right now. Is that true, Chuck, right? That's probably a long, obviously, the Expressway Authority has made some changes, but they're the ones who make the ultimate decisions, so you have to continue to advocate with them, but the other way is through a lawsuit that's being filed. My thought has been and continues to be that we need to find another route outside of that, or minimize it as much as possible, and I'm concerned that it's not the route is not minimizing it as much as we could. And so I've already wrote the letter and authorized Chuck to cite from it heavily in his efforts, but it's a park that I've been to many times, and for those of you who follow me on Facebook, sometimes I'll post some of the trips with our dog Xena and trying to encourage people to go to all these different parks. One thing that I think helped me out is if I have like a lazy Sunday, which rarely happens, but sometimes it does, I look on my GPS map and look for some green blotch somewhere on the map, and if I haven't been to that park yet, I just kind of get in the car, drop the top, and go with our dog over there. And so it's a good way to explore a lot of these. Not sure, did either of you want to comment on the Split Oak issue too?
I can give
Sure.
sort of a sort of 30,000 or 100,000 foot view
Please.
Perspective.
What's happening in Split Oak happens all over Florida because usually when the Department of Transportation wants to put in a road, they look for the path of least resistance. And unfortunately, often the path of least resistance is conservation lands. And there are issues happening in Indian River Lagoon right now with roads that are actually going to protect, they're potentially going to impact state parks and preserves. And so I think that part of what we have to do, I mean, obviously there's the local organizing, which is phenomenal, and that has to keep going. I think we need a statewide policy that says, look, when we set aside conservation lands for conservation purposes, they're off the table for other purposes. It's pretty rare that you have a conservation land where, 15 years later, scientists are like, oh gosh, we made such a big mistake. That doesn't generally happen. So I think there needs to be a policy change to say, if it's conserved, period, end of story.
And I'll echo that too, when they were saying about a study. Now, they can study the land around it, but not through it, because this was already determined, and it says right in the paperwork, in perpetuity, that it's forever. So, I want to, the Soil and Water Conservation Districts passed unanimously to advise both Osceola and Orange counties not to do this. And so we've been meeting with Chuck, and Valerie has done an amazing job being the lead. And a lot of the commissioners we had a big election, so we have a lot of new commissioners. So we're really trying to educate a lot of them now about the impact. Prior to the election, I invited them out to look at it and to actually go to Split Oak. And when we did the tour, a lot of them they had no idea. So I think that education component really needs to come from all of us to really know how special it is.
Thank you, Mr. Rollins.